Wonderful. Okay. So thank you for joining us today, everyone, both in the recording and virtually. My name is Saud, and I am a member of the Brighter Spark Applied Research Team here at Spark, the Center for Social Research Innovation. Welcome to today's Spark Talk titled, How Can Practitioners Assess the Value of Social Work Interventions with Knut Sundell. I'd like to begin by giving honor and thanks to the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations as the traditional inhabitants of the land where McMaster stands. And to say that acknowledgement is to acknowledge a debt to those who were here before us and to recognize our responsibility as guests to respect and honor the intimate relationship Indigenous peoples have to this land. So I will do a brief intro for our speaker, an associate professor in psychology and a senior advisor for social affairs at the Swedish Agency for Health Technology Assessment and Assessment of Social Services. Previous position has been as a research director at Stockholm and director at the Swedish National Board of Health and Welfare. And its research focus has been on evidence-based social work practice and dissemination. So I'm really looking forward to today's talk, and please feel free to take it.
Thank you. I will add to say something about my experiences through the 30 years that I've been doing research, empirical research on social work. And when I started then in the early 90s, it was a completely different situation. You had a majority of social workers that believed that there exists no interventions, methods in social work, but that everything was only an issue of the relationship. Today, it's quite few people that hold this opinion. So there, when you get old, you really realize that things change, even though you don't think they changed quick enough. And one area that has changed not so quickly, or as I would like to have, is then the evidence of social work interventions. There are quite few trials that has been done. I planned this presentation consisting of two parts. One part is the background to this model of how practitioners can assess the value of their own social work interventions, and then present the model in itself. And at the end, I hope we'll have an interesting discussion. Sweden, shortly, as you probably know, is a social welfare state, and we have approximately 40,000 social workers from a population of 10 million. They are only 85% are employed in the public sector throughout Sweden. Social work training then focus in Sweden rather on theories to apply and not on social work interventions or how to involve clients. So it's more theories. And the social work academia, we have since many years now, approximately 200 full-time professors and associate professors. And they also focus on qualitative research, which I will come back to. So the background, I will start with a study that we did some years ago that consists of data from 4 intervention inventories. We sent a letter to a random sample of managers and asked them on the interventions that they had pursued during the last year. And after taking away the duplicates, we had 102 interventions, quite many. And when we looked more closely at those 102, we realized that more than half was imported from other countries as US, Norway, the Netherlands, and UK. And then we also had a small proportion of which then was Swedish developed. We had some of unknown origin. And the last one is like counseling. There's no manual to we coded it as some now. And then we looked at the research evidence for those 102 interventions. And what we found was that 9 of the important did have a solid evidence base. And in our case, we said that it was at least 2 or more RCTs that gave a consistent result according to the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse. None of the Swedish and none of the unknown. So this means that 90% of the interventions that those managers claim to use, and evidence-based. They could, of course, be effective if they were evaluated, but at the moment we don't know if they are. Another example, because this has consequences. One is, of course, that there's an increased risk that you use interventions that are not effective. And this review of reviews consists of close to 600 single trials. Really indicated that 6 of 10 were without effect, a bit more than a third were effective, and 3% were even harmful. Another way to describe this is not from either effective, significantly effective or not, but rather on the effect sizes. And this is another one from crime prevention. And as you can see, the behavioral treatment is the one that is on the top, that decrease the risk to 60%, while the most harmful is gas rate and more than 20% risk. The last empirical study is on an inventory of Swedish peer outcome trials targeting behavioral, social, or psychological interventions. And as you can see, it's a very nice increase from the 90s, where a handful every year. And now the last year, 2019, we have approximately one peer review published article a week. Right. Now, the problem is, if you look on the authors of these articles, it's only 7 that has a researcher from social work as primary. This could well be one of the explanations why there are so few evidence-based interventions when the academia do not interest themselves in this, on these issues. I would say also something about evidence then. And to my experience, there are no consensus of what is evidence. This is a way that many people consider it. At the top is a systematic review with meta-analysis, and at the bottom are ideas and opinions. So if you make a cutoff, you will have very few. On the top, you will have very few trials that has a systematic evidence base. Me and my colleagues that has written this article, we decided that its more interesting concept is the concept of best available evidence. And for us, we mean that less credible evidence is better than none, we think. And furthermore, given the situation today, you could also say that it will always be shortage of research-based evidence. Always shortage. And this can, of course, be discussed. Is less credible evidence better than none? But we believe that it's also some advantages with this that you don't otherwise would have. And one is when you work with social workers and try to support them by giving them tools on how to assess different interventions, you also stimulate curiosity and the desire to understand. So it's a positive by coming. And furthermore, you also empower practitioners. So this is the main reasons why we decided to try to put together our experience since the last approximately 10 years, where we've been doing workshops, 5-day workshops with social workers and others as well, trying to support them in evaluating the model then, and some initial preparations before we go to the real stuff. And the first is, this is of course not for everyone. There must be a need for evidence. There must be a quest for how does this intervention actually help my clients at this workplace. The second is that we want them to check if the intervention is fully implemented and also used for the correct population. Unless this is stated, then we recommend that they should go back and do a re-implementation or choose the right population. Then we have three half-day courses. One is based on Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner of 2000. for his work on how decision making goes. And the main reason why we have this is to make people aware of the cognitive biases that govern our normal decision making. And then this is then combined with our aim to try to include more scientific measures, scientific methods in our, we'll come back to it. And we have a crash course in literature search and also a small course in how to formulate a question people. People sometimes wonder, how does it work trying to make people be an expert in literature search? And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make them find systematic reviews in the first case. And if there are no recent systematic reviews of this area where they are in interest, then they could look for single studies and see how they can find something. Very popular. The PICO course, the social workers love it. They really love it. And this is, of course, a scientific tool, when it comes to systematic reviewing them. So these three things first, and then the model comes. And this is our model. Could say 5 parts or 5 steps, whatever. On the left-hand side, we mean that it's less certainty of effects and higher risk of harm. And on the other hand, it's the other way around. So we don't tell social workers where they should aim for, what they should choose. That's up to them. What we do is that we try to teach them, try to make them understand the different 5 parts. And I can directly say that, of course, we don't train social workers to be researchers, to do control research or to do systematic reviews. But we tell them the meaning of it so that they know the difference between results from control research from a feasibility study. Okay, so I will pass through my parts and try to describe the pros and cons, because all those 5 parts have the pros and cons. So we start with the program theory or theory of change. What are the variables that are supposed to be accountable for a change in the direction? And this is the easiest or the first one. And the problem is, of course, that everyone can have a theory, but a theory, untested theory, is just theory, nothing more. And I will give you an example of my papers here. We had a couple of years ago in Sweden a case where a residential care for teens that were sexually abused or with severe mental health issues. And at this residential care, the therapy in choice was holding. This means that the staff embrace the children for up to 6 hours, and that the fear and anxiety that this creates would release old emotions and prepare the child to new positive emotions. And with increased trust and the ability to express their inner pain in words, other opportunities are given to create security for the child. So attachment creates contact and provides care and recovery. And I was reading inside now, so I wouldn't say anything wrong. So this is a theory of change. So if you hold these children for up to 6 hours, they would feel very well. Now, an alternative theory of change is, of course, that holding creates anxiety and reduces trust in treatment staff, and they will recover. And the reason why this case was come to our attention was that a girl tried to get away from holding and broke her arm. It was a police case. And afterwards, this residential care closed down. Another interesting case is from social work with street gangs. And I say this because in Sweden, we are having a large problem with street gangs for the moment. And they're very interested how this will be solved because they're killing each other by their number. So I was looking at Malcolm Klein's book from 95 that was called Social Work with Street Gangs. And a quite frequent theory of change was that to promote law-abiding group activities, for instance, sport activities, etc., which would create a social worker and gang member bond, which would make social workers gain the trust of the gangs and gang members divert from crime. That was a theory of change. An alternative theory of change is that group activities increase group cohesiveness, which increase gang crime, which seems to be the correct description or theory of change. But the problem with theory of change, the good is that it brings social workers to reflect on what they are doing and how they are doing it. The negative side is that you can always construct a theory of change, and you need a lot of knowledge on risk and protective factors to be able to see if they are reasonable or not. So the second is then feasibility, which really seems a bit contradictory, but it seems like uh, social workers, social services in Sweden don't know exactly what kind of clients they have. So this would be a way to get information on client recruitment. Do they recruit the clients that they are supposed to recruit, or do they recruit other clients? The cons then is that the information that normally is most informative or important is not documented in the case files. And of course, feasibility does not say anything about if it's effective or not. So we'll come to client change, and we talk about 4 types of assessment. Client's assessment, the first one is open-ended questions. It's good because both clients' motivation and belief in change, but as we know, client views as well as practitioners are open for misinterpretation because of cognitive bias. So one alternative that we suggest then is, when it comes to practitioner assessment, not to use the normal way to have a group discussion, but instead to have a method which is called Delphi. There are different methods, but in Sweden we use this Delphi method, which means that you have a facilitator that starts a questionnaire and select a group of practitioners that are experienced in this specific intervention. So it's not theory, it should be practice. They should have practice experience. And then they are on their own, they should answer these questions, where the answers could be yes, no, or don't know. For instance, a question could be formulated like, based on your experience with housing first compared to transitional housing progressions, increase housing stability for people with substance abuse addiction. And if the people, the staff that answer these questions are typically in consensus, for instance, that at least 7 out of 10 agree, then we consider it a form of evidence, although quite low. The shortcomings of having a group discussion is that the people that have leading individuals or individuals with high status will probably get their voice heard more than those that have other opinions. Okay. Third type of client change is using standardized assessment tools, measure pre and post, and using scientifically developed instruments are, of course, to prefer, but on the negative side is that it's poor flexibility because the items are fixed. Single subject design, I do this. This is results from a study we did some years ago on family group conferencing in Sweden. And the red line describes the cumulative percentage that were re-reported for new in interventions after the index investigation. That is the family group conference. It ends on 60%. Is this a good value or a poor value? It depends very much on the one you ask. In this case, we happen to have a control group. We had control group that fared much better. Only 40% were re-referred for new interventions, for new support of services. This, sorry, this single subject design, I would very much to promote, and makes the single individual client the one who is measured before and afterwards. So if you think, you said the first 12 days, if you make this days instead of months, first 12 days, you get a baseline, then you have an intervention, and then you have a follow-up time. And if the problems are much worse at the beginning as in the end, you have a case for data that you can use, especially if you could use it for more clients that would have the same problems. Okay, we're coming to the end of the model. Control research is, of course, very nice because of well-detected form. You can also discuss causal effects. But most importantly, the cons is one single trial is rarely definitive. Working with systematic reviews, we often find situations where at least they are very differently effective. Perhaps just still on the right side, so to say, but not as effective. So that's the really one with a systematic review. And like I said earlier, we don't expect social workers to do systematic reviews, but we want them to understand the value of a new, well-done systematic review as a tool to understand effective or not. But also systematic reviews has cons. And the first obvious is if there are no research, you don't have a good systematic review. If you have poor research, you have a poor systematic review. And age, as the number of systematic reviews are increasing tremendously, it's also important to have an idea of when the review was done or the search was done. Just to describe, as we do to the social workers, in the horizontal line, you can see plus and minus, and the red dot describes the average in a hypothetical case. And this is the confidence interval where 95% is significant effect is. So if you just have one study, it's impossible to, or you could only speculate if you say it like that, if it would be replicated in other settings of the research, perhaps a different, sub-different nation. Now, if you have several studies and have this very nice situation that all the 5 studies are on the positive side, I would say that most people are very willing to trust this as a good intervention. Now, if we have the third example, where the results are heterogeneous, this might, like the first glance, give you an impression that it's a poor situation, but on the other hand, it might be something which you could, that could stimulate further research. This is perhaps a special subgroup. You can have this intervention while these are those, and then you could do more. So this is our model very quickly. And of course, you ask yourself, are there risks and limitations? Absolutely. First of all, we don't know if it works. We are trying it out now in a pilot population. It still might not work, of course. And another risk that someone mentioned is that social work might be overconfident and stop with constructing or identifying the theory of change. I think that's enough. That's also a question to look at. And at last, also contextual constraints. Sweden has a situation that is in a way positive, that we have an increased interest in evidence-based practice and also an awareness of insufficient knowledge of how to identify evidence. So the last slide, we'll turn back to the situation which I started with, that a lot of change has occurred since, and I just want to show you that this, although change takes slow, something happens. Change takes place. Thank you. Can't hear you.
Thank you for that great talk, Newt. Yeah, we have a small group today, so I think folks, please feel free to unmute and have any questions. I have one, and I think I saw someone unmute before we said this.
Thank you very much, Professor Sundell, and to Spark for hosting this, facilitating this. I work down the hall from Spark at McMaster University. I'm the managing director of the Digital Society Lab, and I really enjoyed this talk. And it got me thinking about a number of different issues. But maybe it's a general question that I wanted to pose, and I invite you to take it in whatever direction you'd like, is how can sort of academics facilitate this process? And I think you've described one approach, and I'm just curious how you navigate potential tensions between practitioners and academics throughout this process, right? I can imagine that practitioners might come in with the view that they know their clients best, that they're operating with constrained resources, and they may have a certain type of reaction to an academic that comes in and suggests that maybe they ought to approach it in a different way, an academic that maybe has more resources than they do and doesn't know the clients like they do. So I'm curious about how you navigate that partnership into something that's mutually supportive.
Okay. But first of all, let me remind you that we have done this for 10 years. So the model which I presented has gradually emerged, so to say. And we work with maximum 20 social workers. That's them. And we have had 5 full days distributed over 3 or 4 months. Now we're trying a smaller one, which I don't think is really good, with 3 days. And it's obviously so that some people come to the course without actually understanding what it would mean, or without having the support from the manager. And earlier we tried to demand that the manager should support this by coming to one of the meetings, but it didn't happen. So if we have 20, we start with, let's say we finish with between 15 and 18. So it's a dropout, of course. On the other hand, it's very rewarding for us academics trying to teach this, because those that continue are very interested in, and sometimes I fear perhaps they become doctoral students and not go back to their normal social work practice. So it's back and forth. There are positive sides and there are negative sides. We haven't had any problem with the academia. It could be because they don't know what we're doing. Was that okay? Or did I answer your question?
You did. Thank you very much. I'm just, again, I'm inspired by the talk and thinking about how it potentially transfers to my field of political science and digital technologies, about how we can build sustainable partnerships with practitioners, right? In a way that, we each sort of contribute as effectively as possible. Yeah, thank you. It did.
But I said, some people I said, how can they learn Pico? They don't understand Pico, but they love it, really love it. And for you, we are working with systematic reviews, and we have a lot of templates for assessing studies, assessing systematic reviews, et cetera, which we bring into. And sometimes we realize, okay, if assessing the scientific quality of a single RCT, they don't like that. That's a bit tricky, but that's a bit tricky for us as well.
One question that I had, Professor Sundell, right at the beginning of the talk, you mentioned that there's a dearth of evidence and evidence-based interventions in social work. And at Spark, we recently engaged with an organization that works in the youth social services sector. And we found something similar, that a lot of the interventions that were still being used either had no evidence, or there was evidence that they weren't all that effective. And I was wondering if you had some insight as to why that is the case, why in social work in particular, there's a lack of evidence, or that interventions seem to stick around despite evidence that doesn't.
That's a question that you actually should give to social work academia. I think it might be, one reason is that very many, or sociology is very strong in social work. And sociology has not during the last 30 years at least, been interested in interventions, the effective interventions. It's a tragedy in a way that the academia, I mean, in Sweden we have 200 professors. Nothing comes out when it goes to social work interventions. This is, by the way, the exact same situation when it comes to criminology in Sweden. As I mentioned, we have a large problem with gang-related crime. And when we've been searching for, we'll publish a review then on interventions to prevent membership and gang-related crimes. And we found 43 studies, and of those, 42 comes from North America. One comes from Scotland, and none come from the rest of Europe, including Sweden. So one can wonder, how can it be so? How come that the discipline of criminology, as well as social work, then hasn't interested themselves in how to prevent crime? That's a huge question. 20 years ago, I tried to, in my quite many talks during the years, and I sometimes stressed the risk of harm, which didn't make big difference. And I think that might be because of the frustration that you can be aware of, that there's a risk that clients do fare worse, so to say. But what should you do when you don't have any support, either monetary or managers or from politicians? I think that the change will be, when it comes to social work, is that the generation that now are PhD students, they will adopt other perspectives on research, as for instance, then quantitative coming to evaluating range. But the old professors, they don't seem to be very in change. But I would probably not be myself if I was forced to work with a qualitative synthesis, for instance, the qualitative study.
Maybe on the topic of change in perspectives, I think right at the very beginning of the talk, you said that when you first started, there's the impression that everything was just relationships and not interventions. And I thought that was interesting to bring up with some of the research that we were doing, working with social workers that were trying to prevent youth reoffending. They seem to say the same thing, that it's just about the relationships that we formed with these youth that a lot of the times were limited in the actual intervention.
Of course, relationship is important, but I don't understand how relationship is distributed if you don't have any interventions together with it, or the relationship perhaps emerged from the intervention. But as I said, this has changed. This is not a especially frequent opinion anymore.
Maybe just to follow up on Saud's question, which just got me thinking about the contrast between relationship and intervention. How do you conceptualize intervention? What is the boundary of that kind? Can a relationship be an intervention? How are we drawing the boundaries of that?
That's a really good question. Do you have any definition you happen to know? We've been looking around, and I haven't found any, so to say, more substantial definition, but I believe it has to have a start and an end.
Hmm.
Intervention has to start with the problem that is to be solved. And it can't just go on forever and ever like psychoanalysis. You have to have a stop sign. And it also needs some kind of communication of the intervention to other people, either in written or in the content has to be distributed further on. But it doesn't necessarily need to be a written concept, although that's obviously an advantage. But it's a tendency that people see everything as an intervention. And okay, in the one part, you could say it is also, but as a scientist, I'd like to have a definition. that don't include everything. So I think the relationship comes with the intervention. You can't create a relationship without some kind of intervention. Or it's something else, and it's love or whatever could be.
Yeah, I think even as I reflect back now on what I heard, it was social workers saying these workshops were really about just having a chance to talk to me. And so relationship building and context.
Well, 20 years ago, it was a hype. They're called the Great Psychotherapy Debate, Models, Methods, and Findings. And the conclusion was that based on a really poor systematic review, he said that 70% of change of the effect comes from the relationship. I think it was 7% from the intervention, and the rest was not measurable. The nice thing, or the absurd thing, is that 10 years later, he wrote some articles in a prestigious psychotherapy journal. I think it was Psychotherapy, where he said that the intervention, the relationship was then reduced from 70% to 7%, but it still was effect. If you're interested, send me an email and I will send you the references. So what kind of research are you primarily interested? I understand you're interested in interventions. Are there any specific?
Yes. So here at Spark, as for the Better Spark Applied Research Team, we do applied research oftentimes with nonprofit groups. And yeah, that can include things like program evaluation, but also um, things like change management. But yeah, intervention is really a key point of focus for us right now because one of the partners that we're working with is looking to expand their program array. And so we're trying to find evidence for what type of interventions are both realistic and also supported by evidence. And a lot of our experience mirrors yours. We're having a really hard time finding good evidence or evidence that is relevant in the right facilities or even the right places.
Wonder if might ask one last question about the outcomes of your engagement with these practitioners. So I think one of the challenges in my field is that some literatures accumulate well and others don't, or less, right? That is to say that you get a sense some set of academics are communicating with each other, learning from each other, and the knowledge is accumulating. Whereas in other subfields or other literatures, maybe it feels just a little bit more disconnected. In the context of what you had presented, how could this approach be used to better accumulate evidence? It sounds to me like the outcome here, the primary outcome, is about training practitioners to be thoughtful consumers. But I imagine another potential outcome is equipping practitioners or connecting practitioners to academics such that what the information that they're accumulating can be shared more widely.
It's very attractive to have some kind of research support, perhaps you could say, for the practitioners. We don't support them. We try to. It's more like we are helping them to get into the boat, and then we put them out into the sea, and they have to take care of themselves. In Sweden, we have a lot of research and development units throughout the country. Those, however, at least earlier, it was more like that. Those researchers were not top researchers. And a lot of people and later applied for a position and got a position at the university and then disappeared. You have to have stability, I think. Stability is a key. It's interesting that you raised the issue of accumulated knowledge and the distribution of knowledge. We did, in a colleague some years ago, a study on, it was looked at all the publications and citations from 6 different disciplines, all the professors and associate professors for a 10-year period. And top was caring sciences, public health, and psychology. The really bottom was education. but also sociology and social work. And we argue that's very dangerous situation because they of course publish, but they publish in Swedish. And publish in Swedish and the academic society in Sweden isn't that large. So in a way, you review your colleague or your friend. This has now changed, of course. We have, when it comes to applications, funding applications, I think it's standard to have researchers from abroad to sit in the committees that decide. Anyway, it was a really poor situation, which, to my knowledge, because we're doing a follow-up for the last 10 years, the situation has changed quite dramatically when it comes to number of publications in these disciplines, sociology and social work. So you could say that my last 10, 15 years have been more and more a meta researcher looking at research rather than producing research. Comes with the age, perhaps.
I know we're reaching the end of our time here, and Dr. McAndrews, maybe you have questions. And Colin is just sending the message in the chat, so maybe there's the opportunity to wrap up the talk. But just on behalf of Spark and everyone here and folks who are watching the recording, thank you, Professor Sundell, for the talk and for sharing your insights and the great conversation we had. And for folks who are listening to the recording, I will say that if you have any questions, please email talk.to.spark@master.ca. And to hear about all our future Spark Note wonderful and